Hi guys, Mr. Hanley here, and as you all know, we're zooming in or recording videos for this week. I just figured with 23 of us zooming in, it would be a little bit difficult to get everybody in and make sure, oh, do we have this person, do we have that person, and so it being a larger class, it's probably easier if I record videos a bit. So we are going to, a couple of things before I start though. It might be tempting to kind of fast forward through the video just because you'd be like, yeah, I watched the video. Don't do it. You'll only be hurting yourself. I'll try to keep the videos fairly short. I think with this program, I'm limited to 15 minutes anyway. If for some reason I need more than 15 minutes, I may have to include a part 2. I'll tell you at the end of the video. A little bit of a stuffy nose. That's why it might sound funny, but let's get into it. If you remember, we just finished the 3 Punic Wars, which were Rome against Carthage, and so we are going to discuss what's going on after the Punic Wars. Oh, if you are worried that you don't have your notes with you, it's okay. I would encourage you to just kind of write things down on a piece of paper or even type them on your computer as you're watching this until you can transfer them to your notes or however you want to do it. And so for the first little bit of these slides, you're actually not even going to have to record anything. I'm just kind of giving you how we get from the Punic Wars to the First Triumvirate, which is what we're going to talk about in a couple of slides. But I just want to be able to get you to that point. So ideally, it's actually ideal that for the next couple of slides, there isn't anything necessarily that you need to know for the test anyway. So let's talk about the Roman Empire. So, as we move out of the Punic Wars, by the 2nd century BC, the Roman Senate were the governing body of Rome, as it says right there. So, you have the Roman Senate. Remember I said before at the beginning that the Roman Senate originally was just kind of there to give advice to the consuls, and the consuls were kind of in charge. Well, by the 2nd century, now the Senate's basically in charge. Members of the Senate were elected from the richest members of society, and we talked about that before. The patricians were the ones who were, the Senate was chosen by the patricians. The plebeians could vote, but the patricians were the only ones who could serve. And they served in the Senate for life. They weren't like nowadays in America, we have senators for 6 years. In the Senate in Rome, you served for life. It's almost more like a Supreme Court justice, which we have, and they serve for life. As time went on, the pool that the Senate was chosen from, though, got smaller and smaller and smaller, and their powers got greater and greater. So what does that mean? It's getting closer and closer to an oligarchy. Remember we talked about an oligarchy. Oligarchy means rule by a few of the elite, and so it's becoming more and more of an oligarchy as it goes on. It became almost absolute power in the Senate and was contained with just a few families. The rich families became richer and richer, forcing many small landowners out of their land. So they hiked up the taxes. They raised a lot of different made things difficult for the small farmers, the small landowners, and made it difficult for them. And they forced them out of their land, took the land for themselves. And once the farmers didn't have any land anymore, they had no way to really make money other than just to serve the people who own the land. These small farmers drifted to the city, giving each city a large section of landless poor. So these people were just kind of drifting to the city, looking for work, figuring out where can I work, where can I get some money just to feed my family. And so each city, which was a huge, huge city compared to the rural country, would have this large section of poor people just begging or looking for any spare work that could be offered. The cities were having difficulty handling this amount of poor people because it's just a lot of people hanging around, and it was a growing social and economic problem. I mean, nobody wanted to see that many poor people without food and everything. It was a problem. Different groups had different ideas of how to run the government. So whenever there's a problem in the government, there's always going to be differing opinions. There's never, I mean, you could come up with the easiest question in the world. There's never going to be an agreement on how to handle that problem. You can look at politics today. We have so many different issues that would seem like it's just so obvious how to deal with this to you and I, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how obvious a problem is. You're going to have different people disagree on it. I mean, you could have doesn't matter what opinion you have, you could discuss that opinion. I mean, something that seems the most obvious, like, I don't know, don't chuck puppies off of a building or something. And you could say something that seems obvious like that, and somebody's going to be like, well, not in every circumstance. You might have a circumstance where you might need to, and it's just, people can be crazy. So different groups have different ideas of how to run the government. And this caused factions to arise. When we talked about factions before, we're going to talk about them again right here. Anybody remember what the name of the two political parties were? Anybody? All right, Derek, I'll call on you. What do you remember the two political parties were called? Oh, yes, you're correct. Populares and Optimates. Optimates, that's right. So the Populares, if you remember, they favored the common people, and they favored direct democracy. Who knows what direct democracy is? Caleb, I see your hand. Caleb, what is direct democracy? That is right. That's when every single... I know, I'm just being a good... I bet if we were in class, Caleb probably would have raised his hand for that one, though. Direct democracy is when the people themselves vote on every issue, and they have a direct influence on each decision that's made. And so the populares, being people that favored the poor and they favored the general population, they favored direct democracy. And there was the Optimates, who favored oligarchy. Remember, oligarchy is ruled by a few, and they wanted oligarchy controlled by the aristocracy. You guys remember what aristocracy is? They're the rich people. So we have some attempted economic reforms. We have two people. Again, you don't need to know, you needed to know Optimates and Populares, but you already have that in your note-taking sheet. So nothing that I've talked about today you need to know for a test. It's just to kind of get us from point A to point B. There are two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They are Populares, so they favor the general population of people. They felt like the big problem was a lack of small farms. It felt like all the farms are big, huge farms owned by one person who owns this huge plot of land. They say, what we need to do is get more farms into the hands of small farmers, where subsistence farmers or something, meaning they have just enough to feed themselves, maybe a little bit extra to sell. They felt like they needed small farms. These two dudes right there. They tried to convince the Council of the Plebs to take back public land that was held by large landowners and give it to the landless poor. So if you remember, the Council of the Plebs was the plebeians' answer, or the Council of the Plebes, some people call it that. It was the plebeians' answer to the patricians who were in the Senate. The patricians were in the Senate. Plebeians couldn't serve in the Senate. And Council of the Plebes, or plebs, was a place that the plebeians could serve as well. And they were able to end up, over time, end up having more and more power, almost to the point of the Senate, not quite. And so these guys were trying to convince the Council of the Plebs to seize some public land that large landowners would have their personal farms, but then they would have public land, whether it be like a field or something that isn't necessarily used for farms, and give this land to the poor to be their farms. And they could try to convince them to do this. While the wealthy landowners of the Optimates were furious, because it would be more competition and it would be taking some of the land that was theirs. Even if they weren't using it, it would be taking their land, and they didn't like that. It doesn't matter how much money or how little money you have. You don't want anybody taking any of your money. So the Optimates were furious, and they murdered both brothers. Getting killed right there with some sort of blunt object. And the attempts to bring reforms ended up bringing more instability, and more instability was on the way. So this idea of trying to shift more power to the people, creates this big rift, this big divide between rich and poor. We're kind of we see that happen all the time in the world, and we kind of see it a little bit in our country right now as wealthy people are getting wealthier, and some people are getting poorer with different economic problems, and there's always an anger that can happen with the poor and a jealousy of people who have money. There were military reforms as well. In prior years, the army was made up of small landowning farmers. So your army, it was led by the two consuls, right? They would be led, and they would consist of small farmers, basically anybody who's a landowning farmer. Well, what did we just say was happening? Well, there were less of those because they were moving to the city. They were losing their farms and moving to the city. So if you were a landowning farmer, you were a person in the army. Now you have less landowning farmers. That means you have less people in the army. And so there's a problem. They're like, we need people in the army. So a new consul, remember they were reelected every year, new consul every year. The new guy was named Gaius Marius. That fella right there. Look at those eyebrows, huh? There's some mean eyebrows there. He was a member of the Populares, and he said, I will take not just landowners, but I will take the poor. And by the way, the reason why they would have landowners fight in the army is because they felt like they had more of a stake in things. If you owned land, you would have more of a stake in seeing the battle through and seeing it contested and putting up a good fight, because you were trying to protect your own land. If you didn't have your own land to protect, you theoretically wouldn't care as much. So this guy Gaius Marius said, I want poor people to serve in my army, not just the landowners, and I will give you a reward for your service. I will give you land as a reward. So these people who are in difficult times and were just trying to beg were like, wow, I can actually get land in return, and they signed right up. And the volunteers increasingly, interestingly, instead of swearing oaths to Rome, which before they would promise to protect Rome, they would promise to protect the general himself, and they would swear allegiance to the general, Gaius Marius. So this is a little bit of a change. It seems like a subtle change at first, that instead of swearing allegiance to Rome, they're instead going to swear allegiance to Gaius Marius. But this new type of army, it was a type of army that was not under government control. During this time, the Council of the Plebs, which was, again, more Populares, was fighting for power in the Senate. So they were fighting to see who could get more power. The Senate, which were the rich people, or the Council of the Plebs, which were the poor people. And we have another general arise named, you don't need to know any of these guys. Again, so far you don't have anything to write down. It's just getting you from point A to point B. We have this guy, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. He's an optimist. So we got this guy back here, Marius, who's a Populare, and we have Sulla, who's an optimist, and he had command of one army. And the Council of Plebs tried to transfer control of the army back to Marius. So this guy gets control of the army, gets control of it after Marius. So Marius was more of a Populare, has the army, all the army loves Marius, but his time's over. Now you got Sulla coming into play, and Sulla is an optimist, and the Council of Plebs try to kind of transfer control the army back to Marius because they want him. Most of the people like him, but Sulla doesn't like that. Sulla resisted this, and a big civil war breaks out between the optimists and the optimists. I'm saying optimists and the Populares, and so this big civil war breaks out, and Sulla wins. He stamps down the rebellion, and he restores power to the rich people. Maybe not the ending you prefer, but he used this army to restore power back to the Senate. He takes power away from the Council of the Plebs. He removed most of the power from the Council of the Plebs, gave it back to the Senate, and made the power with the rich. And the rich now kind of control the power again. Not a fairy tale ending to it. But one consequence of this is that he showed an example of using an army for personal gain. I could use an army and actually help myself, help my political party. I could use an army to help position myself or give my faction more power. That's what he did. And so other people, this would prove attractive to many more ambitious men in the future, like the one we're about to talk about in the First Triumvirate, which looks like I'm at 14 minutes and 20 seconds about right now, so I guess I don't have time to talk about that because I'm trying to keep this video at 15 minutes. Should I record a part 2? I'm going to record a part 2. So this will be part 1. You're going to have a part 2 as well. I'll only go a little bit longer. I'm sorry. I'll only go a little bit longer. You will have questions to answer, and we'll talk about the First Triumvirate and a guy named Julius Caesar in part 2. Goodbye.